My name is Dr. Raoul McLaughlin. I have degrees in archaeology and ancient history from Queen's University, Belfast. My subject is the Roman economy, including trade beyond the imperial frontiers. I have published several books on this subject. This is part 2 of a lecture on Greek and Roman voyages in the Black Sea. I delivered this talk to the Classical Association of Northern Ireland at Queen's University, Belfast in November 2018. The lecture was prompted by the recent discovery of intact ancient shipwrecks in the Black Sea. The question is, why were ancient Romans in the Black Sea? You can read about this subject in my book, The Roman Empire and the Silk Routes. The best account of Black Sea trade from the Roman era dates to the reign of the Emperor Hadrian. The account is provided by a Greek writer named Arrian, who served as governor of Cappadocia in Asia Minor. In addition to his military career, Arrian wrote a history of Alexander the Great and a 10-volume account of Trajan's wars against the Parthian Empire, which has not survived into modern times. During his term as governor, Arrian also composed a tactical report called The Array Against the Alani, a people on the east of the Black Sea. This described how the Roman army in the province of Cappadocia ought to be formed up for battle if a steppe people called the Alani breached the Caucasus Mountains and invaded Roman territory. His work on the Black Sea is composed in the style of a Greek sailing guide known as a perilous, a circuit, which describes coastlines and sailing routes for mariners. Most of the document, known as the Perilous of the Black Sea, is based on direct experience or details gathered from Roman informants. In his report, Arrian describes the entire circuit of the Black Sea, including places subject to Rome, regions ruled by allied regimes, and territories controlled by independent nations. He includes details about ports, landmarks, marine hazards, and sites that would have attracted foreign visitors. He also provides information about frontier administration, political arrangements, defense strategies, cultural practices, and belief systems. Arrian begins his Perilous of the Black Sea with an address to the Emperor Hadrian, and starts the narrative from the Roman port of Trapessos, on the southeast corner of the Black Sea. Trapessos was a prominent Greek city, but some of its civic amenities had fallen into disrepair due to neglect. The port was near the historical frontier of Colchis, and Arrian reminds his reader that this was the coastline reached by the Athenian general Xenophon when he led 10,000 Greek mercenaries out of Persia in 401 BC. This was the place where the battle-weary and exhausted Greek soldiers cried out in thankful exclamation, "The sea, the sea." Trapessos was the main base for the Roman fleet on the Pontic shore, and Arrian had selected a number of military craft for his voyage along the Colchis seaboard. In addition to the rowers, each of the ships could carry an onboard unit of between 30 and 60 infantry troops. These ships included lightweight Liburnian galleys, which had a single, centrally placed mainsail and a bank of 60 oars, 30 oars on each side. The vessels could either be rowed by the trained oarsmen or make way under sail when the wind conditions were favourable. There were no cargo ships in the squadron assembled by Arrian, but the Liburnians sailed with a large trireme galley that operated as the command vessel. This trireme could have had up to 180 rowers, and it carried heavy military equipment, including cumbersome ballistic weaponry. But triremes had limited cargo space and were difficult to manage in adverse weather. It was customary for Greek and Roman travellers to perform carefully prescribed embarkation rituals before undertaking a risky sea voyage. Incense was offered to the gods at harbour altars to ensure divine assistance for a safe sailing. Arrian had an ox slaughtered to fulfill his obligations, and when the entrails were examined on the altar and showed no corruption, a perfumed libation was poured on them as an offering to the gods. Arrian explains how at Trapessos he had repaired and enhanced Some of the ceremonial features connected with these practices. Rough and weathered stone altars standing near the harbour had been replaced with white marble replicas inscribed with the correct Attic Greek in place of the corrupted script used by the local Hellenic community. A statue of the emperor had been erected at the harbour, but Arrian informs Hadrian, "Though your statue has a pleasing pose, gesturing out to sea, the sculpture is not a good resemblance, or particularly attractive." Arrian reports that he had ordered another statue to be commissioned and sent to the port, so the monument might better convey the dignity of the emperor and the authority of Rome. Trapesos had a prominent temple devoted to the Greek god Hermes, the deity associated with trade and travel. This temple was reported to be in good condition, but Arrian thought that the existing Greek statue was not adequate, given the significance of the site, and requested that Hadrian send him a replacement image of the god, at least 5 feet tall. Arrian and his soldiers said prayers to the emperor, and then headed down to the harbour where the ships were awaiting their embarkation. On leaving Trapesos, the Roman squadron sailed east to a garrison post named Husulimen that was less than a day's voyage away. At the fort, Arrian had the infantry soldiers perform military manoeuvres with a display of javelin throwing to demonstrate their combat readiness. The squadron under Arrian's command left Husulimen in the early morning, taking advantage of the cold winds that blow down from the surrounding coasts. When the wind dropped, Arrian ordered the oarsmen to row the vessel along the Pontic seaboard. Then, with little warning, dark clouds rose up from the horizon, and the squadron was caught by a sudden storm. As waves threatened to swamp the low-lying decks of the war galleys, the Romans stowed their sails and tried to row out of the turbulence. Arrian reports that the squadron was saved when a violent offshore wind suppressed the waves and pushed the heavy surf back from the struggling vessels. He writes, "Having suffered much, we arrived at Athenae. Athenae was a small deserted settlement, named after an ancient temple that was dedicated to the goddess Athena. It was also the site of an abandoned fort that the Roman authorities had decided not to garrison. The site had no harbour, but there was a relatively safe mooring place close to the shore that could accommodate a number of ships and offer shelter from the strong winds blowing along this coast from different quarters. However, that particular night, violent thunder and lightning woke the troops and signalled that another storm was approaching. As the wind rose, Arrian realized that the mooring place was no longer safe, and by the light of torches and lamps, he ordered his men to immediately beach their ships on the shore. Ropes and cables were used to haul the Liburnian vessels up onto the beach, but Arrian ordered the trireme to take its chances afloat. The trireme was needed to haul the smaller galleys back into the water with tow cables, so its survival was essential. Out at sea, the crew threw down heavy anchors and cabled the vessel to an offshore rock to ride out the storm. But before the last Liburnian was dragged ashore, the full force of the storm hit, and Arrian reports that the sea turned completely savage. Only one vessel was destroyed in the storm. It was a Liburnian galley that had been caught broadside by a wave as it had turned on its mooring to make the dash onto the beach. The vessel tumbled over and was smashed against the shoreline by the pounding waves. The crew escaped and swam ashore, but the galley was broken up on the beach. 2 days later, when the storm had calmed, the Roman troops were able to salvage the wreck. Arrian reports that everything was retrieved, including the sail, the rigging, the nails, and even the sealing wax was stripped off the vessel. He adds that when the task was completed, none of the fittings remained except for the ship's timber, which you know is an abundant resource in the Black Sea region. As the storm subsided, the ships were refloated and spent the following night at their mooring. Arrian reports that Towards morning we struggled against the waves coming over the sides of our ships. But when a northerly wind arrived, the squadron were able to depart Athenae on a calm sea. From Athenae, it was a 25-mile sailing east to a well-fortified Greek city called Apsaros, Gonio in Georgia, at the mouth of the Kura River. Apsaros was supposedly named after a legendary Colchic prince named Aspertes, who was killed at this site by the Greek hero Jason. It was said that when Jason seized the golden fleece from Colchis, he fled on board his ship the Argo with the sorceress princess Medea. In some stories, Aspertes led the Colchic fleet in pursuit of Jason and cornered him at this site. But when Aspertes agreed to parley with the Argonauts, he was murdered. In other legends, Aspertes was the infant son of King Aretes, who was abducted by his sister Medea and dismembered by her as their father approached with the Colchic fleet. King Aretes was paralyzed with grief when he saw the remains of his infant son, and ended the pursuit at this site. According to Arrian, whichever version of the story visitors to the city chose to believe, they would all be shown the same ancient tomb. The port of Apsaros was the site of a large Roman garrison consisting of 5 cohorts, or about 2,500 troops. The city had a hippodrome for horse racing, and a theatre which would have been of particular interest to Hadrian, as he was an admirer of Greek theatrical culture. An inscription reveals that there was a community of veteran soldiers resident in Apsaros, who had decided to remain in the city after receiving their discharge retirement bonuses. Pliny estimated that Apsaros was about 140 miles from the fleet base at Trapezus. Apsaros controlled an important east-west route from Armenia into Pontic Asia Minor, so the stone-built Roman fort at Apsaros was larger than other military outposts on this frontier. It occupied a rectangular area with a gatehouse on each wall, flanked by adjacent towers. There were 4 corner towers on the fortress walls, and a series of 5 square and 3 rounded towers positioned around the perimeter to maximize sight lines and firing positions. Arrian informed Hadrian, "I issued the army its pay and inspected their weapons." He also reviewed the walls and its trenches, soldiers on sick leave, and the garrison food supplies. Arrian included a full report on the condition of the defences and the garrison at Apsaros, but this report was written in Latin and unfortunately has not survived. 3 years later, in AD 135, an army of mounted Alani warriors breached the Caucasus Mountains and threatened to invade Asia Minor. In response, Arrian made this fortress his command post and summoned the Cappadocian legions to repel the steppe invaders. From Apsaros, Strabo suggests that the voyage north along the Colchic coast was a relatively easy sailing, since the shores are soft and the coast has river outlets. The ships under the command of Arrian were about to enter a perilous frontier territory defined by ancient myth. To learn more about this subject, please see Part 3 of this lecture, The Ancient Romans in Georgia. Subscribe to my channel and follow the link to my book, The Roman Empire and the Silk Routes. Thank you.